What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Zach and I make videos about photography, camera gear, amateur videography, and vlogs. So in today's video, we are talking about camera settings that you can use to help you make better vlogs in 2021. I just made a video a few days ago and got that posted up about all the different types of gear that you would need to make vlogs. And today we're digging into the settings that you can use on those cameras to help you get a more consistent look for your vlogs this year. We're gonna be covering things like resolution, frame rate, shutter speed, aperture, ISO, color profiles, and setting your audio levels. So let's jump right into it. First up, let's talk about resolution. What is resolution? Well, resolution, when you're talking about video, that's gonna really come down to what the quality of the image is. Most smartphones and cameras these days are going to give you the options of shooting in 720, 1080, 4K, and even some devices will go all the way up to 8K recording. Some things to consider about this: the resolution, the more storage size it's going to take up on your device, and the higher the resolution also correlates with how intensive it is to process the videos when you get to your editing software. What resolution should you use? I would say stick to 1080. If you have a really nice computer or really want the best quality possible, go ahead and bump it up to 4K. I would say avoid 720 nowadays. Most people don't shoot in that. Not to say you can't get the job done, but I mean, 1080 is a good place to be. What frame rate should you select when you're wanting to vlog? So let's break it down like this. Most cinematic content that you've seen at the movies is shot in 24 frames per second. The standard frame rate that most smartphones shoot at is going to be 30 frames per second. And then if you want higher frame rates for a hyper-realistic look for your videos, you'd want to shoot at something like 60 frames per second. I'll actually link videos below that use all these different frame rates so you can go check them out and see what they look like for yourself. Now, what I personally do for all of my videos, I set my camera or my smartphone to 24 frames per second to record all of my A-roll style shots like this right here. If I want to do some slow motion B-roll, what I'll actually do is bump it up to 60 or 120 frames per second. That way, when I get into my editing software, I can actually slow those clips down and get some really nice slow motion. So where should you start? Again, I would check out the videos below to see what you like the look of best. A lot of folks really like the look of the 24 frames per second. Next up is shutter speed. So now we know what frame rate is. Shutter speed's the next logical thing to talk about because you want to set that based off of what your frame rate is. So to keep this simple, just double what your frame rate is or get as close to double as possible, and that's your shutter speed. If we're shooting at 24 frames per second, set your shutter speed to 1/50th of a second. If you're shooting at 60 frames per second, that would be 120. If you're shooting at 120 frames per second, you want that to be 240. Setting it this way, it ensures that there's no weird motion going on in your video, like conflicting things between your shutter speed and your frame rate. Pretty simple, double the frame rate, and that's your shutter speed. Next up is aperture. So aperture is really only going to come into consideration if you're using a camera that has a lens on it. Think about aperture like your eyes, like your pupils. So you go into a dark room, your pupils actually get a lot bigger to let more light in. That's exactly how it works on a camera. If you go outside, your pupils get smaller in order to better expose the scene for your brain so you can see what you're looking at there. Camera's the same way. The lower you set your aperture, something like a 1.8 or a 2, is actually going to give you a lot more light coming onto the sensor, and also a side effect of that is also giving you a more shallow depth of field. That's how you get that beautiful background blur. On a cell phone, you don't have a ton of control over the aperture. On some devices, you can get like fake background blur, which, I mean, it looks all right, but you know, whatever. I don't really like it because I notice that the edges of things are typically not great. Next up, let's talk about ISO. ISO is essentially the camera's sensitivity to light, which isn't a perfect definition, but it's a pretty good explanation of what it is. If you crank up the ISO to a higher number, you're actually kind of introducing more gain to the sensor, which in turn makes the image look brighter. So higher ISOs you'll typically see when you're indoors and shooting. When you're outside or you're using artificial light like I am right now, you're going to see a much lower ISO number, which the lower the ISO number, the cleaner your image is going to be. When you're in a studio setup like I am and you have artificial lights that you can control, just set your ISO as low as it can go, and that's going to give you the best result. That being said, if you're outside, you're running and gunning, you're walking around, you're changing environments, just set the ISO to auto and let that camera make up its mind for you as to what the exposure should be like. It's a lot easier, it's hassle-free, and it, for the most part, gets the job done. Let's talk about audio next. So I'm using a lavalier microphone right now, and when I'm using a lav mic, that's the little clip-on thing over here on my jacket, I like to always manually set the audio level. That allows me to get a good sound while also minimalizing the sound that I get from outside sources. If I'm shooting with something like my shotgun mic, I might put that on auto, but I typically like to put it kind of right in the middle. You can set the audio levels on most devices pretty easily. I find that on my Nikon camera, I like to keep it around 9 or 10, and on my Samsung, I actually like to keep it about -5 dB. That way, it's not too hot, right? And the microphone's not trying to figure out like what the most important thing is in the scene and trying to adjust the audio level on its own. That's when you get some really you get excessive noise from the environment. So manually setting that is gonna give you a better, cleaner audio track. And the last thing up to talk about is color profile. A color profile can be set on most devices, cameras, smartphones, my GoPro. Basically what that is, that's saying like, okay, how much of this camera's processing are we putting into this image? So, and this comes down to personal preference and also how much you actually want to edit your footage. So the video I posted a few days ago, I'll link that up above. I actually just used the built-in vivid profile on my Z50 and I thought the image looked pretty good. I knew I didn't have a lot of time to edit and I just wanted to take that out of there. I used the vivid. If I actually want to spend more time editing, I'll turn my camera or my phone to something like a flat profile, which doesn't have a lot of contrast or color added to it. That allows me to go in and add those things myself when I get my files into DaVinci Resolve. Let's summarize everything that we talked about today and also kind of peg down what I think the best settings are for getting started with vlogs. Now these all come down to personal preference and how you want your videos to look. Where I would start though is keep it simple. So 1080 on the resolution, keep the frame rate at 24 frames per second, the shutter speed at 50 frames per second, shoot at a low ISO if you're in a studio setting, shoot on auto if you're out and about. Make sure to set your audio levels prior to recording to make sure you get a great audio track. And also think about what you want as far as color. Just keep it simple and use one of the built-in profiles at first. If that's not giving you the look that you're going for, consider moving to a more neutral or flat profile and doing the color grading yourself once you get it to your software. Well, that's all I have for you today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. This is part 2 of 4 of my Getting Started vlogging series that I'm working on. If you liked what you saw today, please hit that subscribe button down below, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.